Good evening, everybody. I'm Father Edwards, pastor of Mary Mother of God Parish here in North Scranton. With me is Father Jeff Tudgay, who is the judicial vicar for the Diocese of Scranton. This is part of a three-part series entitled We Have a Pew for You. It's an outreach to people who, for some reason or another, don't feel very well connected with the church, with the Catholic Church, and may have questions that need clarification. So Father Tudgay works, basically most of his ministry at this time is dealing with issues with divorced and remarried people and how to help them connect with the church. He's also pastor of St. Lelius up in Elmhurst. I'm the pastor here in North Scranton. So you can submit a question through the comment section or through private messaging. And my producers on the other side of the computer, Cheyenne and Tim, are here to help us. And we'll just go from there. We're wearing our mask. I will take the mask off and whatever while we're talking and resume. And our producers also have them on. So, Brother Jeff, do you want to cover the first question? And please submit your questions. We're here for you. That there is a pew for you. This is part of a three-part series that will continue through the fall. So, Father Jeff, you have a question?
Well, I do. And before I get to that, I just want to thank you, Father Edwards, for having me here. It's great to be with you guys. You know, one of the things that strikes me about your introduction and your theme, We Have a Pew for You, like, to me, nothing speaks to the church as an instrument of reconciliation, like what you're doing with these series that you have. I think it's so cool, and I think it's so critical that we can talk through some of these things. As many of you know, I certainly know, life can be complicated, and life can be messy, and sometimes we make choices, and sometimes we have to work our way out of those choices. That's okay. The fundamental reality is that the church is here to help reconcile us to God. That's the church's mission. So as Father Edwards said, I serve as the judicial vicar of the diocese, so I'm a canon lawyer by training, and part of what I do for my job is run the diocesan tribunal, which handles all annulments that go on in the Diocese of Scranton. And my hope is that we can break into that a little more, like what is an annulment? Maybe you've heard rumors, maybe there are some urban legends out there, maybe you know a little bit and you disagree with it, or maybe you want to know more. That's what tonight's all about. So I think it's a great opportunity. So why don't we dive into this first question? What I'll do is sometimes there might be something in a question and I don't understand it, but we can talk through it and you know if there's a detail or something that needs to be hashed out, we'll work through that. All right. First question: if the Catholic Church doesn't recognize a marriage by a justice, I'm assuming they mean a justice of the peace, then why do you need an annulment to remarry in the church if you are divorced by the law? So there's a lot going on in this question, and the first thing I want to do, before I get to the question itself, I want to address a little bit of what's happening when, let's say someone, for example, gets married in a church, okay? Broadly speaking, for those of you who have been married, you know that in order to get married, and Father Edwards and I know this well, what's the one piece of paper you have to have before you celebrate the wedding?
Baptismal certificate.
And the other thing?
A marriage license.
Marriage license. Without a marriage license, we go to jail, right? Exactly. So the one thing that we have to have in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is a marriage license. What's happening is because the state recognizes the fact that we are ministers of the Catholic Church, right? So when you're coming to us to get married, what we know is that in Christian marriage, so we'll use Catholic marriage for example, right? There are two things that are happening, right? There are two domains. The one, of course, is the civil domain. And because we're ministers of the church, the state deputes us that the sacrament that we witness has civil effects, right? So you have to have a baptismal certificate, and we, whenever we're celebrating a marriage, have to have that marriage license from the Court of Common Pleas. All right. So we've got two things going on. We said there's the civil reality that the state deputes us to be able to execute, and then there's the sacramental reality, right? For Catholics, right, those of us who have been baptized into the Catholic Church, right, and we become Catholic by one of two ways. We're either baptized, right, and then we receive all of our sacraments of initiation, or if we're a baptized non-Catholic, we're received into the Catholic Church through the sacrament of confirmation and Holy Eucharist, maybe as an adult. Maybe that applies to some of you. But if we're a Catholic, we are bound to something called canonical form of marriage. What does that mean? Gosh, that sounds like a mouthful. What canonical form basically is, among two people who are baptized, at least one of whom is a Catholic, It means that you have to have a man and a woman coming together with a witness that's either a priest or a deacon and 2 witnesses. So at the bare essentials, at the bare bones of what's required for a Catholic wedding, it's a woman, a man, a cleric, a witness of the church, a minister of the church, and then 2 witnesses, usually maid of honor and a best man, right? So that's what we call canonical form, and all Catholics are bound by it, okay? So what happens is, sometimes people will decide, maybe for example, somebody's fallen away from the practice of the faith. That happens, right?
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh, right? Full disclosure, when I was an undergraduate, before I went into seminary, I went through a little agnostic phase when I was in college. So I went through a little agnostic phase when I was in college, kind of stepped away from the regular practice of the faith, and then as a junior in college, came back to the practice of the faith, and then when I was a senior,
Here you are.
I came to understand. Here I am, I'm a priest, okay, right? So it happens, right? Sometimes we fall away from the practice of the faith, and maybe at some point in the midst of that, we happen to fall in love with somebody, and maybe that person's not Catholic, or maybe they're not even Christian, right? And we go and we get married, whether it's by a justice of the peace or a non-Catholic.
But not in the Catholic Church.
But not in the Catholic Church. So we're bound by canonical form, but because of the way life unfolded, we didn't get married according to canonical form, right? So I'm just going to read through this question again to make sure. There's a lot going on in what I said. I just want to focus back on this question. If the Catholic Church doesn't recognize a marriage by a justice of the peace, then why do you need an annulment to remarry in the church if you are divorced by the law? Okay. So, first of all, if a person who is bound by canonical form gets married outside of canonical form, like a Catholic gets married by a justice of the peace.
At the beach or something.
At the beach or something like that, or at a resort, or the barn. I know barns are popular these days, which is beautiful. That's something that can be easily fixed by us, right? So if that applies to you, right, if you're a Catholic and you're still married with the person you fell in love with long ago, and you didn't get married according to canonical form, and maybe you find yourself back in the church now, and you're asking the question, well, gee, maybe we need to deal with this. We can deal with that, and it's through a ceremony called a convalidation, which basically means you come into the church, right? It doesn't have to be a big elaborate thing. You have your priest, you and your beloved, and 2 witnesses, and you exchange vows.
Very
right?
simple to do.
We've all done it, right?
Hundreds of times.
Well, I'm not as old as Father Edward, so I
That's
haven't done it hundreds of times. But we do it all the time, right? And it's always a very beautiful moment, isn't it? It's beautiful. Nothing to stress out about, nothing to worry about, okay? So, maybe you got married, and maybe your marriage, maybe you got divorced. Maybe,
as happened in this case.
As has happened in this case, right? So maybe you got married outside of canonical form, like by a justice of the peace or on the beach or whatever, right? But maybe you got divorced, and maybe you're single. The fact is, you're actually okay with the church. So if you're divorced, right, and not remarried, you can receive the sacraments. You can receive Holy Communion. Get to Mass.
I would tell that person to get to confession because they have done something that we do not advise.
That's right.
But they do not need an annulment.
That's right. That's right. If that person were to get married again, so the person who got married by a justice of the peace, if they weren't married according to canonical form, right, we need a marriage nullity procedure called a lack of form annulment. And it's a kind of a simple procedure that my tribunal oversees and instructs, and then we get them ready to be celebrated for marriage.
That can be done in a matter of days, almost.
Yeah,
I've turned them around no time at all.
Yeah, yeah, because sometimes we've
far different than a true annulment,
That's
which
right.
is lengthy.
That's right. That's a pretty involved process. So I don't know, Father. Do you think? Do we bring anything else from this question that
Well,
we did not
that is many people fail to. Sometimes there are priests who fail to understand. They think that person would need an annulment. No, they wouldn't. They didn't follow the rule of the church. Therefore, the marriage is invalid simply because of where it took place.
That's right.
They chose to do that, and they should not have, but they did. And we can work with them easily.
We can work with just about anything, by the way, and that's
correct.
what my tribunal is all about. The tribunal that I run at the diocese It's a place of justice, it's a place of mercy, it's a place of understanding. So we're here for you. I mean, that's the disposition of everybody who works in our tribunal, right?
Very good.
We have some folks who work in our tribunal who themselves have experienced, the operation of the tribunal as well. So they're here to help you. We are here to help you, okay?
That's good. Very good.
Let's say I want to just touch on another element of this question. Let's say you got married according to canonical form, okay? So let's say that
You did it the right way.
Did it the right way.
Traditional Catholic marriage.
Traditional Catholic marriage, you did it the right way. And let's say you got divorced. A lot of people think that just because they got divorced, they can't receive the sacraments.
Good
Not
point.
true.
That's correct.
Not true. What would prohibit somebody from not receiving the sacraments? If you got divorced and then remarried without going through the annulment process, right? So you have a civil marriage. That would prohibit you from participating in the sacraments. But if you got married in the Catholic Church, right, and you're divorced, right, as long as you're not remarried,
That's right.
you can receive the sacraments.
And you should, assuming you're not in the state of mortal sin.
Oh my gosh,
You
absolutely. And if you're in a state of mortal sin, go to confession. You don't bite, right?
should. Not lately.
Not lately, that's right, yeah. Right? So if you find yourself in an irregular situation or whatever, or you find, maybe you're thinking, gosh, maybe it's been a year or 30 years since you've been to confession. It's okay. Come to confession and enter back into the celebration of the life of the church. Here's the thing, folks. By virtue of baptism, we belong to Jesus Christ. And he will stop at nothing to bring us back to him.
That is correct.
Right? What do you think?
Do you guys have any new questions that have been popping? Okay, Father.
Okay.
We have some others that have come in ahead of time.
All right. So, when you are young and don't understand marriage, that marriage is a sacrament, what do you do when one spouse sees the wrongs of the other, of their life, and the other has no interest in taking responsibility for their part for changing? Here's the thing. When we enter into a sacrament, right? So what happens? Two people come together, right? And in the celebration of this beautiful sacrament, I take you. Two baptized people confer the sacrament of marriage on one another. We don't confer the sacrament. We simply witness what two baptized people, what a baptized man and woman are doing on their own, right? And it's an incredible privilege, isn't it?
It is.
You celebrated a lot more weddings than I have.
Many.
But
Hundreds.
but it's an incredible privilege. So the way that works, right, what the Code of Canon Law says and what Catholic theology says, particularly the theology of the Latin Church, it's a little different from our Eastern Catholic brothers and sisters, but for us in the Latin Church, right, we say that the baptized confer, a man and a woman who are baptized, confer the sacrament of marriage on one another, right? And there's like 1,500 years of study and scholarship on this moment of consent, right? So the basic boilerplate definition that canon law gives to us is that consent makes marriage. Well, what goes into that consent? The fact is, it's actually pretty complicated psychologically, because whenever we're choosing to do something, right? Like, I think I'm going to go to Dunkin' Donuts and get a cup of coffee. I've identified that I want something, or in my case, because I'm addicted to caffeine, I've identified that I need something, and if I don't get some coffee, I'm going to be pretty grouchy to the people that I work with. I've identified that I want something, right? And then I go and I choose and I do it. The Catholic tradition says that the human soul has two sort of capacities, or two abilities to do things, right? We have the intellect and we have the will. Right, that's what like the philosopher Aristotle tells us. That's what St. Thomas Aquinas tells us. That's what St. Augustine tells us. And Catholic marriage is built on the employment of the intellect and the will. I have fallen in love with someone, right? I've come to know someone, and I choose to spend the rest of my life with them, right? So in my intellect, I've reflected on what I'm feeling. I've reflected on the quality in the other person that I love and that I've come to appreciate. And what I've chosen to do, first by the proposal obviously, and then of course the acceptance of the proposal, But then in the wedding itself, in the celebration of the sacrament itself, I've taken everything that I've deliberated on in my intellect, and I've let my will take from my intellect and give it over, which gives way to a sacrament, right? I would say for us as Christians, right, there's something very beautiful and so weighty about Catholic marriage. And in light of this question, I think we have a responsibility to use that capacity of our intelligence and our sense of discernment, right? Thinking like, okay, is this good or is this bad for me? Can I spend the rest of my life with this person? Conversely, right, that other person should be employing the same level of discretion toward us, right? Based on what I've observed, can I spend the rest of my life with this person? And it's what the Code of Canon Law calls due discretion of judgment. So I've observed a lot, right? I've let a lot about this person who I love rattle around in my mind and in my heart. When we go to place consent in the act of marriage, right, what we're doing is we're saying, I've considered all of this. I've considered my life with this person. I've considered what marriage is. I've considered what love is. I've considered what commitment is. And I choose to marry this person. What we have the responsibility to do when we're getting married is to have a pretty good sense that that other person has done the same. That they have considered marriage. That they have considered what love is. That they have considered what sacrifice is. That they have considered what commitment is. And I would say the greatest recipe for success in marriage is when both parties, in their maturity. Now, obviously, none of us are perfect. None of us do that perfect. The day I was ordained a priest, I thought, I'm pretty sure this is what God wants me to do, right? Did I have like this vision that said, okay, Jeffrey, I want you to be a priest? No. But in my heart, I had a sense that this is what God has wanted me to do. And after 8.5 years of priesthood ministry, I'm convinced that of God's love for me and how beautiful it's been. Marriage is the same way. We have to critically think about ourselves and our own capacity as well as the other person, so that as we go forward, we know that we're employing the gifts that we have at a natural level, which give way to something beautiful.
But the facts that may be hidden in that question is, and I'm twice Father Tugay's age, in the 1970s and even earlier, we would, as a church, it might be very fair to say, we married people who did not bring any of the things he just mentioned to the table. For example, girls 19 and pregnant. When I was first ordained in the 1980s, that couple came to us to get married. Mm-hmm. And that put us into a difficult position where they were mature enough to get married. They were just out of high school, but they wanted to be married. And if we did not marry them, they would go somewhere else and get married. Mm-hmm. So when people say, why are there so many annulments today? Part of the answer is because there were weddings that should not have happened 30 years ago when I was a young priest. But that's what we did. For better or for worse, that's what we did. Some of those marriages have turned out very well. Many of them did not, because does a 19-year-old understand everything that Father Jeff just covered about discretion? And probably not. The 19-year-old girl is pregnant, is scared, and I understand that. She's in a difficult spot. The boy's scared too, but she's got a baby, and she doesn't know what tomorrow holds and what her future holds. So they got married. And that's it. What does the annulment prove? It's helping us say, did they really know what they were doing? And obviously this woman is, the man or woman asking questions says, wait, we were not there, and they might be there now, or she's there now. Mm-hmm. But hopefully, as you go through the annulment process, and I have those papers in that drawer right over there, not only do you answer this series of questions so you get an annulment, but you look at yourself through the questions you are posed, and you say, did I know what I was doing? And if I'm in love with someone else and I hope to remarry them, am I making the same mistake twice? Have I asked hard, am I ready to give my life to this person? Do I understand what that entails? Do I understand what forever entails? And many people don't. I mean, we're priests forever. Maybe when we were ordained and we laid on the floor at the cathedral, then we understand, probably not. So what this woman is asking is there's been some growth, at least on her part. Now, they're still married, apparently, based on a little bit of the question you got. But, Father Tugay, one thing that I think kind of hidden in that question is if somebody goes for it, if a woman comes in and says, I want an annulment, and I think I would have occasion on, but my husband is a pain, my ex, they're civilly divorced, and he doesn't want anything to do with this. Right. What do we need to tell her or him who says, I don't want to get him involved, he's annoying, he could even be violent? Sure. What would we say to that who may be watching the show?
So with the annulment process, and actually I'm going to just discuss a quick question that came in light of exactly what you said, Father Edwards. So what in the past, the Diocese of Scranton, as well as other tribunals, had asked for a fee for annulments, right? Now there are a lot of urban legends out there about, you know, oh, an annulment costs $10,000 or whatever.
We've all heard that.
We've all heard that. It's an urban legend. Annulments in the Diocese of Scranton for a declaration of nullity for the process. So again, we have a staff of tribunal ministers, right? I'm there. It involves paper and copy
Lots
and
of
all that.
paper.
Yeah, exactly. The fee that we have historically charged in the Diocese of Scranton was $500. As of December 1st, 2015, there are no fees currently that are charged for the marriage nullity process in the Diocese of Scranton.
Zero. Donut. Goose egg. Nothing.
Okay.
That doesn't mean that in filling out the paperwork, the person might not have a certain emotional challenge, but it's not a financial challenge.
That's right. So if there's a financial challenge or a perceived financial challenge standing in the way, don't let that spook you.
Never.
In the case, some cases, obviously we know life happens, and some divorces end up in a very messy way, to the point where we deal with. So when you petition our tribunal for a declaration of nullity, the law itself gives you a status in the marriage nullity college. You're known as a petitioner. Your former spouse is known as the respondent, because a marriage nullity process is intrinsically a trial, right? So I'm by virtue of the degree that I hold and the office that Bishop Ben-Bera conferred on me, I'm what's known as an ecclesiastical judge. And I work with a team of other ecclesiastical judges, some lay, some clerical, and we as a team of judges, or as a college of judges, look at all of the testimony that's provided by you, by your spouse, and witnesses that you select, and we adjudicate whether or not we believe that marriage is in fact null or not. Okay, so you as the petitioner, right, have your testimony and everything that you're alleging balanced by your former spouse, who's the respondent. Now, a lot of people get spooked out about a former spouse because there could be violent incident. Maybe you haven't seen or heard from your former spouse in 30 years.
Right.
You have no idea where
That is not uncommon.
Not uncommon. You don't even know if they're, in some cases, the spouse was dead. Yeah, exactly. And then they were free to marry, of course. When you enter into a marriage nullity trial, in order for us to execute justice, we have to bring your former spouse into the trial. What that does not mean is that you don't have to deal with your former spouse at all. We take care of all of that as the tribunal. Our tribunal ministers and our tribunal staff handle all of the communication with your former spouse.
And if you would want to have nothing to do with it,
I've had people write back and told me what I could do with my marriage nullity proceeding and where I could stick it. Which means that we simply declare them absent from the marriage nullity proceedings.
it's a free country. They don't have to participate.
They don't have to participate. We encourage that they do. Even if the breakup of your marriage was messy and complicated, even if you don't have a good relationship with them now, we handle all of the aspects of the relationship between your former spouse and the tribunal.
And a case is, if the ex writes in and does participate and contradicts you completely, what that tells us is, well, what a lousy relationship this was.
Yeah.
I mean, they're really at odds with it. Well, that's telling us that this is an immature relationship.
That's right.
They probably shouldn't have got married.
Well, what often happens too is in a marriage nullity process, depending on what some of the grounds are that we identify, we will also bring in, first thing I want to say is anything that you share with the marriage tribunal in terms of the breakup of your marriage and all of the really sensitive details of your life with your former spouse, all of us as ministers in the tribunal take an oath of confidentiality. So there is no information that ever leaves the tribunal. Anybody who works with, in, and for the tribunal takes an oath of confidentiality. So that way the sensitive details of your life are protected by our oath of confidentiality and secrecy. I just wanted to put that out there.
We have some other questions. I know.
Yeah, I know we've got
two
other questions here. with some cases, right, what we will also do is bring in a psychological expert periodically. And that will help us. Maybe the violence in your former spouse is due to some psychological like disorder or disturbance. The expert will help us identify that, and we'll be able to see your perspective more clearly, right? Or maybe there was a point in your life where you were struggling with something psychologically. The expert, the psychological expert, will help the judges see that more clearly, and we'll offer in a very gentle way, we'll be able to help you see what was going on either in your life or in your former spouse's life at the time when the marriage broke up.
Our goal is for you not to get remarried, but to be happily remarried.
Yeah.
It could be asked if it's obvious that the person has a problem with, say, alcohol.
Right.
Well, you need to address that. You're never going to be happy.
That's right.
And we would encourage you to say, you need to address this problem so you can find joy, whether you ever marry again or not.
Because as we all know, sometimes the most difficult thing, but also the healthiest thing, is for us to have our own truth kind of mirrored back to us.
True.
Where we take a good look at ourselves, we think,
Good friends do that.
Good friends do that.
Does that.
That's right, exactly. What do you think? I've got
Fair enough, good.
Yeah, everybody okay?
Thank you for your questions from the
You guys
studio
are
audience.
awesome. All right, can a Catholic who left the church and was baptized in another denomination come back to the Catholic Church whenever they like and receive communion, such as family special occasions? Okay.
That's a great question.
Great question. So here's the thing. With regard, there are 3 sacraments that have a similar characteristic: baptism, confirmation, and the sacrament of holy orders, right? And the church's theology understands those as what we call character sacraments. Basically what that means is that when we receive those sacraments, the Holy Spirit places a permanent imprint on our soul through which God can act in us and through us. And that imprint can never be taken away, and it can never be undone, right? So Father Edwards and I are priests forever, right? When we die, we'll be in the priest section of heaven, hopefully. Maybe in the priest section of purgatory for a couple of years for me, I don't know. But
Once a Catholic, always a Catholic.
Once you're baptized, right, that baptism can never be undone. So it happens that sometimes people leave the Catholic Church. Maybe there was a priest that was nasty to them, or a nun was a jerk to them, or a parishioner. For whatever reason, people leave the Catholic Church. It happens. You know, again.
It happens every
It happens
church.
every church, exactly.
It happens every family.
So a lot of times, people will experience what looks like a baptismal ritual in another church, right? And what they're basically doing is, in a sense, I mean, to use the technical language of canon laws, they've defected from the Catholic Church, right? They've kind of, rejected everything that Catholic baptism allows us to experience, which is really the fullness of the sacraments. It allows us, Catholic baptism opens us up to the celebration of all the other sacraments, right? So for a person who has left the Catholic Church, right, and sought baptism in another church, what we would not want is like, well, I think I'm Catholic for this occasion. For a day, exactly. Like if you're going to come back to the Catholic Church, it needs to be like a permanent, like, I'm back. I've realized the truth of the Catholic faith. I've realized the beauty and the richness of the Catholic faith. There's no like in and out with the Catholic Church. If you're in this situation or this circumstance applies to you, I think maybe it's an opportunity to kind of dig deep and take a deep look at, the role of the church. First of all, why did you leave? And
Fair enough.
Why did you leave? Was it something kind of superficial?
Was it
something
theological, personal?
Exactly. Were you having a bad day? Whatever. So maybe look at what motivated you to leave. And if you can come to terms with that, recognize what the motivating reason was, and then come to a deeper understanding of why the Catholic Church is important to you and why you want to come back, I'd say go to confession.
And go to your priest and he'll help you.
Yes, sit with your priest or a deacon or somebody.
Right.
They're again, I went through an agnostic phase in college, and I came back, and the priest that I went to confession to could not have been more wonderful.
That's good.
And I was some goofy college kid.
That's why we're doing this program, to get the road home. There's a way back, and there's a pew for you. There's a pew especially for that divorced, remarried person.
Exactly. All right, we have a couple. Is Father Edwards on the tribunal?
Well, that's a great question. I used to serve on the tribunal because I lived in Dunmore, and riding downtown to Wyoming Avenue took 5 minutes. but I am no longer there. However, maybe in like, actually, when this was first put out on Facebook, I got a call that night, and I was on the phone with the woman for 45 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not on the tribunal, but because I worked there for years, I know more than many priests do. Father Todd Gay is the guy whose job is to know all the really fine points. I know all the basic points, but not the finest points. But any priest should be able to help you. Or you can always call the office downtown. Just go on your website,
Call
Diocese of Scranton.
570-207-2238.
And Father Todd Gay or somebody else would have you. So.
Yeah, and the voicemails go to my email on my phone, so if you leave a voicemail, we'll get to you at some point.
Another question. Let's hear it.
Yeah, okay. So, do you have advice for divorced people who feel they are not welcome in the church? Can you speak to today's approach versus the approach 30 to 50 years ago when it comes to divorce?
It's a great question.
Great question.
Mm-hmm. That's why we're here.
There's a lot going on in that question.
Yeah, there is.
You know, I'm sure you've had the experiences. I've certainly had the experience of like somebody who comes to confession and they've been away for like 20, 30, 40, in one case 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
Because they had like a bad experience with a priest.
Or in confession, they had a bad experience. Maybe.
Specifically, it was in
Yeah.
confession, yeah. And like, for me, like this question, I can only speak to my own experience as a priest. As somebody who loves being a priest. I mean, I know that God created me to be, I'm not perfect, I'm far from it. But what I've come to experience and appreciate in my own life, first as a disciple of Jesus Christ, secondly as a priest, is that in my own shortcomings and in my own sinfulness and in my own weakness, I know that the Lord has been very, very merciful to me. What I also know is that priests in the church, particularly like spiritual directors, and I'm thinking back to my first pastor when I was a brand new priest up at Our Lady of the Snows in Clark Summit with Monsignor Jim McGarry, how patient he was with me. I was like idealistic and rambunctious, and he just kind of like sat with me and was so good and mentored me so beautifully. For me, I know that the Lord has been very merciful to me, and that plenty of priests and lay people have been very patient and merciful with me. And I feel like part of my responsibility as a priest is to simply pay that love and mercy forward.
And I want to echo something Father Jeff said earlier. The person who is divorced may continue to receive communion and should, unless some other. But if they're divorced and remarried, of course they are welcome. And whether they should receive communion is a very much a canonical issue. And
Right.
that's why we're here to say there is a process whereby you easily could get to where you could receive communion. It would take a little bit of time, a little bit of work, but that's your priest or
That's what we do, yeah.
here to help you.
So if you're divorced, obviously something happened in your marriage, right? There was something that led to the breakup of your
Or
marriage.
they wouldn't be divorced.
Obviously, right? Maybe it was your former spouse's fault exclusively. Maybe, in all honesty, like if we take a good look in the mirror, maybe you were a contributing factor to that. You know, that's possible for
50-50.
everybody. Or maybe it's both, right? Maybe it was like War of the Roses or something. You know, I mean, maybe it was just something that for multiple reasons kind of went south. I would say Pope Francis has talked about the hospital, and I actually see canon law as an instrument for this. Pope Francis has spoken of the Catholic Church as a field hospital for those who are sick and wounded.
MASH.
Again, exactly, like the 4077. The same thing is true, like what Jesus says in the gospel, like those who are well don't need a savior, but the sick do, right? Now that's not to say because you're divorced, you're sick. You're divorced because something happened in your marriage. And I think the invitation is to come to terms with that and to be able to then say, okay, if you're not remarried, the sacraments, Christ is waiting for you in the sacraments. So I would say the church does not take a judgmental posture. If you're petitioning our tribunal for a declaration of nullity, we're judges, so we're gonna judge the data that you provide.
But not you.
But we're not gonna judge you. We're gonna judge what you say in terms of the testimony. We're going to judge the experience. We're going to use our education and our expertise to arrive at the truth. And then we'll present that to you.
And the truth will set you free. And
Exactly.
hopefully that truth will help you see that this marriage was a bad idea. From conception,
But
this marriage was a
exactly.
bad idea.
But we do it with love and mercy.
Right.
There's no like harsh judgmentalism on our part at all. I hope that was helpful.
In the hope that you would find joy and happiness in it. You know, we're up to 2 young people who are doing our work here, who are very happy. I know they are because I celebrated the wedding.
Look at you.
But that's what we want you. We want everybody watching this show to have, and it's not that hard to do. If you need an annulment, just get started, and we'll help you out.
Come to us. It doesn't
Come to us,
necessarily.
right.
It's not a guarantee that the declaration is
But
going
a
to
good
happen.
chance.
But we're gonna break open more sensitive details, and again, we do so with sensitivity and love, and figure out what happened. And again, we take all that. We take that oath of
Very seriously.
we take it very seriously.
Next question.
Yep. Can you provide guidance for a marriage with a Catholic and divorced non-Catholic who does not believe in annulment? Divorced spouse married in the
great
Catholic
question.
Church. Great question. And
Well, let me try to put some context in it. A Protestant person is not bound to our Catholic form that Father Tugay described before. So if that person says, I'm a Catholic and I'm in love with a woman who had been married before, you know, and there's a Protestant, that's probably a valid marriage.
right, and in this case, the divorced spouse was married in the Catholic Church. So you're dealing with your spouse is divorced and remarried civilly to you. So your spouse has what we call a prior nullity bond, but they don't believe in the annulment process. I get that, because they may not be Catholic themselves.
Right. They probably don't. Most Catholics don't understand what annulment is, let alone a Protestant.
Exactly, and maybe there's a sense of hostility to the church. I get that. I get that. Half of my family is Presbyterian on my dad's side of the family, so there could be some, just I don't want to use a misunderstanding because that sounds like pejorative, but like it's not, for a lot of non-Catholic traditions, something like a marriage process or a marriage nullity process just wouldn't be in somebody's wheelhouse.
It's foreign to them.
Yeah, exactly. I appreciate where you are. Now, technically, a person in that situation who is either themselves divorced and civilly remarried, if the first marriage was a valid canonical form marriage, or if your spouse had a prior bond and you're married now, technically the Catholic should refrain from Holy Communion. That's what canon law asks, and that's what the church is teaching.
Until we could address the case.
If that spouse were the spouse with the prior bond petitions our tribunal for declaration of nullity, and if we rule that in fact their prior marriage is null, then we have to convalidate your marriage,
Which is easy.
which is easy peasy, and then you're freed up to be able to receive the sacraments.
Exactly.
But I would say two things. Number one, you have to trust us, and trust that we have your best interest at heart. And if you can articulate to your spouse, who is divorced and remarried, how important the Eucharist is for you.
To you.
If they love you, they're gonna. I really do think that they'd be open to work with our tribunal. I would hope.
That requires some education, and maybe their parish priest could help them understand.
Exactly. And call us at the tribunal too.
We're saying that the Protestant, we recognize their marriage.
That's right. Christians, exactly.
For them, they were married.
That's
Unfortunately, it did not work.
That's okay. And that's okay. That's okay. All right, so people avoid annulments thinking it makes their children illegitimate. Can you address this?
Great question.
These are awesome questions. Yeah. Oh my God.
We have an intelligent studio audience.
We really do.
And we are not writing these questions down.
No, these are coming to us. These are coming. So when children, the old term that people would have in their mind, but it would be like a bastard child would be the old term, And I that's not a term that exists anywhere in the church's juridic or theological nomenclature, right? That word that's not part of the Catholic lexicon at all. So, whenever we have a marriage, right, and children are involved, the tribunal will give something that's called a putative marriage, or it's thought to have been done. So, for example, somebody's married for 25 years. Two people are married for 25 years. They have children. Beautiful family. That's great. What about the designation of their children, the legitimacy or illegitimacy? Illegitimacy, or children being illegitimate, would be a qualification that would only apply if marriage had never been attempted.
They were
at
legally
all.
married.
Exactly. Exactly. That would only be a qualification that would apply if marriage were never attempted
Okay.
at all. What the church recognizes is that with an annulment proceeding, right, the two people entered into marriage in good faith. They had common life. They had children. Like, they did all the things right. They're never going to be, the term illegitimate would not apply to that situation where a tribunal declares a marriage.
Nothing at all.
Exactly.
For about half an hour, you said the couple comes in, they need a marriage license.
Yeah.
They are legal. You don't get married by the JP.
That's
they
right.
are legally
That's
married.
right.
That's it. But it's not a valid marriage.
That's right.
In our eyes.
That's right. The term illegitimate only applies where marriage hasn't been attempted
Right.
at all.
Right.
So I hope that.
That is
Hope
one
that-
of those
It's a
rumors
great
that
question.
people always
Exactly.
need to
Great
do.
question.
Excellent.
Great question.
You guys are very. Hope you
Oh
have
my
this
gosh.
good every night of this. We have a few series. Go ahead, Jeff.
All right. So I'm separated from my spouse due to his drinking and emotional abuse. I've had people look down on me for not staying. Is a situation like this forgiven? You've got a heavy burden, you know.
That's a powerful question.
That's a very powerful question, and I'm rarely at a loss for words. And I say that not because your question can't be addressed, but just because of the gravity and the sensitivity of it, and your disposition to even ask this question is so beautiful. First of all, the fact that you've even asked this question speaks to the quality of who you are and the depth of your quality as a person. I'm sorry that people have looked down on you. And even
Shame on them.
Yeah,
Shame on them.
Who are they to judge? Right?
God will do the judging in this world.
Exactly. So, if you're in a situation, Catholic theology and sound pastoral praxis and advice would never tell you to remain in a situation where you are a victim of abuse.
I agree 100%.
Father Edwards.
If someone was special to me was in a situation where they were not safe, leave today, not tomorrow.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's obviously that's not even humane.
There are enough crosses that come our way by virtue of the vocation that we give our lives to, whether it's priesthood or marriage. And priesthood and marriage are quite complementary. One depends on the other. The ministerial priesthood and marriage. There are enough crosses that come our way just through the ordinary daily fidelity of life. If there's substance abuse or there's emotional abuse, I don't want to be too quick to say that that's not a cross that you shouldn't carry or can't carry. But
It's a deep question here.
But it's a very deep question, and every situation is different.
That's true.
But if you're feeling judged, so you said, is a situation like this forgiven? You haven't necessarily done anything wrong.
I think she thinks she would be committing a sin to leave.
Yeah.
I think a wise person might say she'd be committing a sin to stay if she was putting her life at risk.
That's right.
Get out of there.
Life. Yeah.
He cannot live with you, and I bet anybody else, in a constructive, healthy fashion. He needs help.
So if this person, and again, if they're an addict, right, you know that there's a certain
psychological difficulty there.
That's right, exactly. So this person may not be even in control. So remember we talked about like discretion, and we talked about the necessary thought and the maturity that we have to validly contract marriage. This person, like if, you know, in a circumstance like this, we've had situations like this come into the tribunal. What our psychological expert was able to say was, like, this person, because of an addiction, was not able to have the discretion of mind and heart to validly enter into marriage. You know, so that's where, like, we use those psychological experts, but they're great help to us.
This is not asking so much a legal question as much as a moral question, a spiritual question.
You haven't done anything wrong. You haven't done anything wrong.
He has he has such a problem that he probably doesn't understand he's doing something. He has an issue.
He may not even understand.
I pray he gets help.
He or she, whoever the abusive spouse is, they may not even understand that they're hurting you. You know,
Do you have another question?
I do. Yeah.
This is so much fun.
You guys, this is awesome.
We have great audiences here in the Scranton area.
Okay, can you discuss the need for witnesses and who witnesses should be? So I'm assuming the person who's asking this question has possibly already petitioned the tribunal.
Thinking about it.
Or thinking about it. They've done some due diligence, right? So again, as an ecclesiastical judge and our other ecclesiastical judges, what we're doing is we're looking into the details of your life. We're peering pretty deeply into certain aspects of your life, and we're going to be specifically looking at the dynamics around where your marriage broke up, right? We're going to be looking, zoning in specifically on what happened around the breakup, because that's going to determine for us, that's going to tell us some of the states of mind or maybe a disposition that prevented marriage from being contracted validly. The fact is, in order for us to do our job, because ultimately, as judges, right, we're going to have to answer to God for the work that we do in the tribunal. So as a judicial vicar, I've got a responsibility that if I've made a wrong judgment and I've declared a marriage null that isn't, I'm going to have to answer to God for that. You know, so there's a spiritual weight that rests on the shoulders of the judges. So we want to make sure that we're gathering as much information as we can to be able to make the right judgment on your behalf, so that you can move forward in freedom, right? With the witnesses, right? So we have the testimony of, when we talked about the two parties, the petition, the one who petitions.
And hopefully the respondent,
And
he doesn't have to.
respondent, but he or she doesn't have to, right?
to.
So we've got the testimony of both parties, so we're weighing that. But then that testimony needs to be fleshed out even more by other witnesses, right? So when we're making a judgment, we've got corroboration between at least 6 parties to a marriage nullity cause, who can provide us kind of this comprehensive understanding of what married life was like and why it broke down. So the witnesses should
be lengthy. The questionnaire the witnesses would fill out is not as lengthy because nobody would know all the ins and outs of a deal. Obviously, good witnesses often are your parents who know you. They know what you were thinking at that age. Your friends might not, but your parents probably would know that this has been a pattern in your life that we had seen. And maybe we were thinking, I wish you were not going to marry that person, but they didn't want to interfere because that will cause a lot of family stress and strife. So, but usually you find 2 good witnesses who will fill out a questionnaire for you out of love for you. And that's a big help to see the bigger picture, as Father was saying.
Because if they love you, they're going to invest themselves in something that's ultimately going to bring you into communion with the church
and Jesus Christ
and Christ Himself, and set you free.
Good point. Good point.
So the annulment process is it takes time, and it should, because it's serious.
Approximately how much in this diocese?
So it depends on how quickly we get our testimony in. You know, it could be as little as 6 months. It could be as long as a year. It depends. We try not to set time limits on it because we don't want to rush the process. Because again, what we're saying, if an annulment is granted, what we're saying is that a sacrament, which is an action of Christ, never existed. And that's weighty. You know, the judges really want to be able to review as much as they can to make sure that we're making the right judgment. And one of this question that just came in, can you summarize some of the judgment considerations that you review? You know, when we look at the details of a person's life, what's in the backdrop is canon law, right? And some of what canon law has to say about marriage would say that a marriage can be declared null for certain impediments, which means you're impeded from validly contracting marriage. One would be a prior bond. Somebody's been married before without a declaration of nullity, right? Obviously, you know, these are just enumerated right in the Code of Canon Law. Impotence is a deriment. It's
rarely seen, but
rarely seen, but it does happen. Age, right? The Code of Canon Law. You can't contract marriage if you're under the age of 14, right? That's an impediment. Another impediment would be what we call consanguinity. You can't marry your relatives, basically. You know,
these are rare,
incredibly rare. What's more common, rather than an impediment that prohibits a valid marriage, would be what we would call a defect in consent, which means
That's broad. That's very broad.
We talked about like the necessary judgment of truly as a mature adult understanding marriage and a lifelong commitment with another person, right? If a person lacks that maturity, right, they're not able to validly consent to marriage. Similarly, if a person intends never to have children, right? If a person has that disposition,
Not uncommon,
they haven't contracted validly. If a person intends to be unfaithful or doesn't intend to be faithful, right, then they haven't contracted marriage. So our tribunal looks at all of these things with the law kind of in our background or our backdrop about kind of the judgments that we make for that reason. So it's highly technical.
It is, but we will, it's funny is some of the, and Father Jeff is also a pastor up at St. Lily's and Elmer's. A lot of marriage work starts right here in this very room, as this couple said with me, that we have a moral responsibility to help them be as well prepared as we can.
Yeah.
I don't know what's in anybody's heart, but the Diocese of Scranton, I think every diocese offers pre-Cana programming, marriage encounter, or engaged encounter, different programs to help couples know what they're doing. Focus tests, the average girl there has 1,000 things.
Yeah.
I have a moral responsibility to help them know what they're doing.
That's right.
So we don't ever have to have the conversation that this marriage was this was ill-advised. That should never happen. I mean, in theory, it would never happen. We do our best.
When we talk about these qualifications for a valid marriage, right, the church respects our dignity so much that the church says, yeah, to confer the sacrament on one another, it requires a mature person. It requires this mature discretion of an understanding. Now, do we do it perfectly? No, obviously, none of us are perfect. But it requires us saying, I believe this is where the Lord is calling me. I think this is what the Lord, I believe in my heart that this is the person whom the Lord is calling me to spend the rest of my life with.
Very good. Any other questions, Shawnee? Did we get the first 3 questions that had come in?
You know what? One last question. Person married in the Episcopal Church was unable to receive the sacraments. Okay, so this person did not get dispensed from canonical form. Okay, got divorced. Since then, ex-spouse died. Since he is deceased, does this change my status in the Catholic Church? It doesn't change your status in the Catholic Church per se, because you've always been in the Catholic Church. Your marriage was irregular because you didn't observe canonical form, okay? But what has changed with the death of your former spouse, really your divorce, but the death of your former spouse, is your ability to present yourself for Holy Communion, your ability to receive the sacraments. So, in this case, my advice, as we've been advising all through this, go to confession and come back to Mass.
That's right.
Come back to Mass. Come back to Mass. And I hope that, like, our tribunal sees every imaginable life situation that you could imagine. And we receive all of it with very open, loving arms. And our ministry is to help you be free. Free, maybe you don't want to get remarried, you just want to find out whether or not your previous marriage is null. Come to us.
Some people find healing in that.
Exactly.
Getting out whether they have any plans on remarrying.
Maybe it was a traumatic experience and you're afraid to go back into some of those details from your first marriage. Maybe there was abuse, or whether physical or psychological. We understand that, and we understand that it's difficult, and we understand that it can be painful. But what we also believe is that the process itself, if it's done with faith, and if it's done prayerfully, that Christ is going to meet you there, and that you're going to discover some healing within the process. Which, whenever we experience healing, there's always freedom. You know?
We've had over 50 viewers tonight.
Oh, awesome.
I don't know how many coming. That's been over 30 questions and comments. We've tried to get to a lot of them. I think someone wants to ask us some resources available.
www.diocesescranton.org. Click on the tribunal, and there'll be a number on there. We have staff in most of the time during the week. We will be here to call you. What I would not advise is Googling like Catholic annulments. Go to a resource that is a truly Catholic resource, like the diocese. And our tribunal, we're working on getting more resources on the tribunal page on the diocesan website. But I wouldn't just like Google Catholic annulments, because you're going to get a lot of misinformation.
It may not be true. It may
Yeah,
mislead you.
Yeah. So email me, call us, call your pastor, email your pastor. We're here to serve.
Your pastor will be happy to hear from a person who's disconnected
Yes.
from the church. And if he does not have an answer, and not every priest is equally trained,
Yeah.
but he knows Father Tadgay or any number
Well, I
of
have my cell
priests,
phone number.
and he can hook you up and get you started, and in no time at all, you can get to where you are at peace with God and church, and even family. And that's why this program had, let me just quickly find the dates for a future, and some of these will be most interesting. On October 19th, we have two excellent priests who will be with me discussing outreach to the Lgbtq community. And that's obviously a very important and sensitive issue, which we read about all over the place today. And I think sometimes Catholic teaching on that issue has not always been understood or accepted very well. That's Monday.
Or presented charitably.
That's a well said. That's Monday, October 19th. And then on Tuesday the 10th, that'll be a week after the election, so our minds will be more clear. Program, we have an excellent priest and a laywoman who will be discussing outreach to the woman who had an abortion and feels unwelcome, unworthy, fill in the blank, but doesn't feel she could ever be forgiven by God, welcome in church. We have two excellent people helping with that, to say there is welcoming, everybody's welcome in God's family, you know, and we have to reach out to them in different ways and more charitably sometimes than we have been known to do. But yeah, I can't reach out to you unless I know who you are. Sometimes you have to take the first step. I have 1,600 families here. That's an awful lot of people. That's just my parish. Let alone the people who aren't members anywhere officially. So, but those are two more programs in this series, and we'll continue it in the spring to outreach to people who need Jesus Christ, need healing, need forgiveness, need compassion, need love. Father Tuggy, thank you so much. I'll give you the elbow.
Hey,
the mask back.
great to be with everybody.
Father Jeff and I have been in meetings all day long today. It's been a very long day, but this was Sean, Ann, and Tim, we thank you for your expertise.
You guys are awesome.
On the other side of it. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good night. Go watch the debates.
Have a good night, everybody. God bless.
Good night, indeed.